All right, let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Top 3 Linux Security Vulnerabilities and How to Fix Them, with SANS Faculty Fellow and industry-recognized security expert, Dr. Eric Cole. Really excited to have him here today with us. You're also joined by Beyond Trust Product Manager Paul Harper, who will run us through a Beyond Trust overview and demo at the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today, and I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions via the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. So now that that's all out of the way, I'd like to hand this on over to Eric, who will jump right in. Eric, always a pleasure having you here. Really excited to talk about Linux security today, so please take it away.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and talk about one of the favorite topics on planet Earth, cybersecurity. So what we wanted to do for you today is one of the pieces of feedback we often get from security folks is there's too many things to do. There's too many priorities. You go on and you search or you get reports and you're often given hundreds and hundreds of different things that need to be accomplished, and the problem is you just don't have enough time. So what we wanted to do is, based on all of the work and everyone we've talked to and all my customers, we sort of want to boil down for you, if you can only do 3 things in Linux security, what are the highest priority items? What are the 3 areas that will give you the best return and help you have the most effective defense to be able to stop and prevent those adversaries from breaking in? So what I'd like to do before I introduce those is, especially when I talk about Linux security, I always just sort of like to demystify some false assumptions that some people might have. And one of those, and some people get mad at me for this and other people don't, but the point is everyone falsely believes that Linux is so much secure than Windows, that it's so much more locked down, and that it's only Windows people that get broken into, and it's only Windows systems that get compromised, and we're running Linux, we're okay, we're secure, we don't have to worry about that. And unfortunately, that's a very, very dangerous mindset, and we are seeing, especially over the last year, many companies with that mindset getting burnt because they are getting compromised because they haven't focus enough energy and effort on the Linux side. So one thing I sort of like to point out is I always am doing research. I'm always tracking information because I'm a big fan of letting data drive decisions. Too often in security, we all have opinions, we all get emotional, but that's not a good way to drive a decision. We want to base it on factual information to make sure we are making the best choices possible. So one thing I've done is, over the last 10 years, I've gone in and tracked the number of vulnerabilities every year for Windows and for many varieties of Linux. And I hate to tell you this, but they're all within about 1% of each other. The number of vulnerabilities in Linux systems are often the same or higher than the number of vulnerabilities in Windows systems. So if you're looking at the pure play data, Linux is no more or no less. I'm not trying to say it's worse, right? It's no more or no less, but it's just as vulnerable as any operating system in our network. The problem is because of the install base. Windows, especially because it dominates on the client side of the house, has a much larger install base. So if you're an adversary, old school adversaries, let's go back 5 or 10 years ago, and you want to break into as many systems as possible. You want to cause as much devastation as you can. Are you going to go after the 90%, or are you going to go after the 5%? You're going to go after the 90%. So historically, Windows has been targeted more, not because it's easier to break into, but because there's so much more of them. So if you're just trying to randomly break into as many systems as you can, and you don't care which ones you're breaking into, you're going to typically go after Windows because there's so many more targets for you to potentially hit. So that's why Windows has been targeted so much more than Linux systems, is because of the install base. However, things have changed. Today, if you're an adversary, you don't want to necessarily break into as many systems as possible. You want to break into one or two systems at an organization that you can either set up a pivot point, or if you get real lucky, directly break in to the database or the data store and be able to steal or take that information. So now we have to ask a different question. We're no longer going to ask who has the larger install base. What we're now going to ask is, where is your critical data located? And that's where things get really scary. In most organizations, and do this exercise. If you've never heard me present before, I love a thinking audience. I want to get you thinking. I just don't want you to sit there and listen to what I'm saying. I want you to challenge what I'm saying. I want to drive you to ask the right questions in your organization. So I'm going to give you lots of assignments. I'm going to give you lots of exercises so you can go in and prove this to yourself. But do this exercise. Make a list of the most critical data in your organization. What are the pieces of information that, if they got compromised, would be really bad, would cause a lot of devastation, a lot of issues, a lot of problems? And the reason why I'm doing this is that's really what we're focused in on when it comes to security. Let's look at a simple question. What is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? Just think about that. What's the difference if you got a call right now and said you got compromised? What would be the difference between you going, I'll handle it in an hour when we're done with the webcast, it's minor, it's not a big deal, or you drop everything and you're going to be living at work for the next 3 days? What is that differentiator? I'll tell you. It's the data that was compromised. If somebody breaks in to your organization and compromises a server or a system that has no data, no information, and nothing sensitive, yeah, I wish it didn't happen, but that's minor. That's not a big deal. On the other hand, if somebody breaks in and compromises our most critical information, then we have a major, major problem. So with security, one of the big things we always have to remember is all assets are not created equally. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes security people do, is they try to go in and secure the entire enterprise. They try to go in and do everything for every system, and it's just not practical. I sort of joke we should have a little cartoon picture where you show the little security person with a little bucket, and they're going to the ocean, and they're filling the bucket with water, and they're coming back to a fire they made, and they boil the water. And then once the water's boiled, they go back to the ocean, drop it in, and pick it back up again. And the caption is, trying to boil the ocean. Right? Never going to happen. And I know we laugh when I hear that, but that's how most companies are approaching security. They're treating all the assets equally. They're trying to do everything for every asset, and that's just not a scalable approach. You need to focus in on what those most critical systems are. What is that most critical data? And here's where the convergence happens. If you go in and you look at what your most critical data is and the servers they're located, in most of our customers, those are Linux systems. So while Windows has a larger install base, Linux is typically the most critical devices and therefore needs the most protection. Here's another exercise. Go in and look at all the hardware that you've purchased and sort it by price. So what are the most expensive servers and what are the cheapest servers? And when you do that, you will find that typically the upper 10% of the most expensive servers in your organization are often Linux. So that's why this is so important. This is why it's so critical that we focus in on those devices. And just one more push on this. I sometimes with our clients will walk through data centers and they'll make comments like, oh, we don't have a lot of Linux, or we're not running Linux for any critical systems. And I stop at the rack where all the appliances are, all their storage area and network arrays with all their critical data, their firewalls, their IDSs, their IPSs, all these appliances. And I smile at them. Linux, 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 Linux. We often forget that most of our appliances, most of our security devices are running Linux as the core operating system. And then the question is, what are you doing to secure those boxes? What are you doing to secure those systems? So this is a very important webcast because in many cases, companies don't understand the criticality and importance of Linux because they're so focused on Windows having a larger install base that they lose sight of the most important systems. So in doing all my analysis and preparing for this webcast, there's three big areas, three probabilistic areas that we see with Linux systems. One is excessive privileges. Two is not fixing the right vulnerabilities in organizations. And the third one is not having proper visibility or optics into what's happening, i.e. logs. And what's interesting with that one, which I'll cover, is it's not necessarily you have too little logging. It's sometimes you can have too much logging. So those are going to be the three big problem sets I'm going to lay out. And then we'll go ahead and look at some solutions. And then one of the things I love about doing these webcasts with Beyond Trust is we'll then give you a real solution that actually works. It's not just me talking about here's features or here's general things you should look for. We will finish up, and one of my colleagues from Beyond Trust will actually go in and show you how the product actually solves and addresses these issues. So let's go ahead and start with the first one, excessive privileges. We often forget that it's not just adversaries from the outside breaking in. It's very often user credentials getting stolen. So most of the attacks we've seen where critical data has been taken from Linux systems, it's often a privileged account or a user's account that had way too much access and way too many privileges that ultimately went in and allowed the attack to be much more damaging than it needs to be. So we need to go in and remember, least privilege, least privilege, least privilege. Only give somebody the least amount of access they need to do their job. And here's the trick. If you're not sure whether they need it or not, don't give it to them. And this is one of the problems we see a lot. Most organizations go, oh, if we don't know if somebody needs the access or not, let's give it to them. And if they don't need it, not a big deal. Here's the problem. Almost all of the incidents we've seen where user credentials have been compromised, if proper access control was in place, if they better controlled the privileges that that individual had, the amount of damage, and I'm not kidding you, could have been reduced by 80%. It's that significant. So the problem is if you're not sure if somebody needs the access, it's better not to give it to them. And then if they need it, let them call up and say, hey, I need access to this data, get approvals and add it, as opposed to giving it to them and then let it be exploited by the adversary. Here's another big paradigm shift. When you go in and assign privileges, why not go in and assign an expiration date? We do this with every other area of our life. Our credit cards expire. Our driver's license expire. Our passports expire. Our access to our data, that never expires. Why are we having this disconnect? Why not go in, and most people in most organizations, they go in and have what I call the sticky principle, which is they get hired and they're given access. And then 2 years later, they get promoted. They're given more access. 3 years later, they keep adding access, but we never take away the access that's not needed. So if we actually had expiration where after 6, 9, or 12 months, when the person no longer needed it, it automatically expired, that would make things a whole lot better. We also want to go in and talking about privileges is make sure that we really try to minimize or reduce any shared credentials, because if multiple people have access, there's no accountability. We don't know who did it. Was it Professor Plum in the conservatory with the candlestick? We have no idea. So we want to go in and make sure that we always have individual credentials. We're always tracking, monitoring access. We also get in to password security. And this is another one to make sure that they are long, they are strong. Now, one interesting thing, there's a lot of work being done here, is remember, if somebody is going to go in and break your password, there's basically 2 levers that you control, the length and the character set. And what's interesting is we've always gone on this concept that very complex passwords, they must have letters, numbers, and special and intermix, and we typically go with a 15 or 16 character password. Problem is, passwords are always having this issue that anything that's easy for you is easy for the adversary, and anything that's hard for the adversary is hard for you. So it creates this conflict. But if we go to a passphrase scenario, now we have a situation where you can remember a sentence, and it's something that's easy for you and hard for the adversary. And once again, a little bit of a paradigm shift, but we're seeing a lot of our clients removing the complexity checks and just going in with a 25 or 30 character password. You type a sentence, my first son was born at Fairfax Hospital. It's basically letters and spaces, but it's long enough, it has enough of the entropy, and very hard for somebody to break, even if they knew everything about me. They might get some of the words correct, but they wouldn't get everything. So that's just another trick, is be creative. Think out of the box. One of the things I always say is, why are we doing the same things? If we look back overall at security over the last 2 years, not trying to be mean, most of the stuff we're doing hasn't worked. Right? There's some great solutions out there, but most of what the masses are doing is not working. So why are we doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? We need to try new stuff. So that's why the expiration date, the just character 25 length passwords, try different things to see what works within your organization. And then we get into the not fixing vulnerabilities. And this one, I sort of want to get back a little root cause. Yes, you do need to fix vulnerabilities, but what is the best way to really secure a service? I know, especially on Linux systems, it's often harder and harder to patch, because remember, security doesn't own the servers. Who owns the servers? The CIO. And CIOs live and die based on uptime availability. So if we're going in and thinking that we're going to apply 15 or 20 patches a month to our Linux systems, we're fooling ourselves. That there's no possible way that's going to happen. So what we have to look at is the best way to secure a service is to turn it off. It's not to patch it. It's to harden and lock down those configurations. And I will tell you, one of the things we obtain with our clients, and depending on where you're at with your maturity, you might think I'm a little crazy. Well, if you talk to me long enough, Sarah will tell you I am crazy, but that's a different discussion there. But the point is, with most of our clients, on our most critical Linux systems, our goal that we achieve is single-digit patching. Single-digit patching a year. So less than 10 patches a year we apply to each of our Linux systems, and the way you do that is by hardening and turning off those services that are not needed. Then, when you go to fix vulnerabilities, The problem often with vulnerability scanners is they don't take into account your environment and the compensating controls that you have in place. So you go in and it might say high, but if you have other measures, the system's isolated, and there's other controls in place, that might not necessarily be high in your environment. So what you always want to remember is we don't want to fix random vulnerabilities. We want to focus in on the vulnerabilities in which there's a real threat with a high likelihood and a high impact to the organization. And I'll tell you one of my favorite exercises, and you can do this with any system, but we find with the most critical, your Linux systems that have the most critical data, this is a great way to stay focused, and it's called threat mapping. And we're doing this often either complementary or in some cases even as an alternative to penetration testing. Because one of the problems with penetration testing is you could potentially put that server in an unstable state. You're hitting that thing for real, so that could cause problems. Second, pen tests often aren't comprehensive. They often go in, they'll find 8 or 9 ways to break in, and they call it a day, but they didn't necessarily find all of the ways, and they could have overlooked key areas that an adversary would use to break in. So threat mapping, to me, gives you that better visibility, and it's less intrusive on the system. You essentially take a piece of paper. We usually use a whiteboard. You might need a big piece of paper, and we break it into 3 columns. And here's what we do. We start off on the right-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we say, what are the most critical systems? What are the systems that contain the most critical data or support the business processes that are most impactful to our organization? So that's the right-hand column. The left-hand column, what are the threats that have the highest likelihood of causing harm to your organization? And then in the middle column, we go, what are the vulnerabilities that are present on that system? Now, the trick is that middle column, list those vulnerabilities 3 or 4 times, because often an adversary uses multiple vulnerabilities in order to break in. Now, here's what you do. Connect the dots. So start at the first threat and say, okay, this threat would need this vulnerability, you draw a line, to this vulnerability, draw a line, to this vulnerability to break into that asset. And then go to the next threat. This threat will need this vulnerability to that vulnerability to break into this threat. And do that. And what you'll find, after you go through about 10 or 15 threats, you're going to notice a couple of those vulnerabilities have a lot of lines going through it. The vulnerabilities that have the most lines are the most critical vulnerabilities to fix. And very often, it's counterintuitive. When we do this with our clients, their eyes always get really big and they go, wow, we would have never, ever thought those vulnerabilities were most critical until you look at it through the lines of the adversary. Right? You need to let the offense be able to inform the defense. And then the third one is no visibility or optics, or maybe to put it a better way, I should say too much visibility, right, and not clear optics. The problem in the past was organizations weren't logging. They didn't have the logs they needed to be able to find what was happening. Now, in the last few years, something interesting has happened. People are starting to recognize that they need to have logs. However, there's this false belief that logs are all about the quantity, not the quality of the logs. So what we're finding is people are going in and turning on just crazy logging, just tons and tons and tons of logs. And that's evident based on this. Do you realize every one of the major incidents, if you go back over the last few years and pick any one of your favorite major breaches and start researching it, do you realize in every one of those cases, they caught the attack? There were entries in the logs, or there were security devices that were going off. The problem is there was way too much and nobody saw them. So the information was there, but there was so much other noise going on, they weren't able to see the things that were important, and they completely missed it. So today, we tend to have way too many logs. And here's the real issue. If your systems are generating so many logs, so many alerts, that it requires 40 hours of analyst a day, and you only have 5 hours, you're going to lose. If the number of hours your team has to look at the logs is less than the number of logs you're generating, that's not a success. You're on the losing team there. So one of the things I always urge with my clients is figure out ahead of time how many hours your team has to look at alerts and look at logs, and then you better tune your logs and tune your devices to generate less than that amount of logs. So this way, what is being generated can actually be reviewed. It can actually be looked at and can actually be taken. Because today, whether you do or don't log an attack is irrelevant if nobody sees it, if nobody catches it, if nobody takes action. So we have to go in and sort of shift our focus of focusing on just what's important and stop trying to get too much information. And the question I always get from people is, okay, well, what should we log then? So here's the exercise that I find works really, really well. Go in and ask yourself, what are the 3 incidents? What are the 3 things that if they happened to your organization would be considered really, really bad? I mean, really bad. Like stuff your executives would freak out about, things that you would be at work after 2 weeks and never go home, things where you or your boss might lose their job, things where the company might go out of business. I mean, talk real bad, really, really bad. So come up with 2 or 3 of those. What are the 2 or 3 things, the 2 or 3 incidents, the 2 or 3 attacks that if they occurred would be put under the category of really, really bad? Then ask yourself, what visibility and what logs do we need to be able to catch that? What would be the information that would have to be logged for us to be able to see the incident, respond to the incident, and control the overall damage? Then look at what you're logging and see if you're logging that. Then more importantly, do you have enough time to review those current logs? And if not, you need to keep whittling down until you have just enough logs that align with the amount of time that you have available. Because this is a problem that I will tell you is getting a lot worse, and it's not going to get better until we get a handle on this. I hear people all the time at conferences, oh, we log 20 gigs of information an hour. And like they brag about this, and I'm like, why are you bragging? Right? Unless you have 1,000 people working at your organization reviewing logs, that is not something you should be proud of, right? Less is better. Focus on having the right visibility and the right optics. And as we've talked about, the threat environment is not getting any better. And if you look at the reports like the Verizon data breach report over the last few years, you look at the Mandy and M-Trends report, you look at the Kaspersky threat report, all of those great reports. If you look at the last 3 years, we are not improving. It is taking us longer to detect attacks. It is causing more damage. We are not heading in the right direction. So we need to step back and say, maybe we need to take a new approach. Maybe we need to look at things differently. And what I urge you to do is look at automated solutions. The problem is in security, we try to do way too many things manually, and manual methods will eventually fail. People get tired, people get sick, people go on vacation, people tell their bosses to go F themselves, right? That's just the reality of the situation. So we need to look at things differently and ask yourself, do we have automated ways of controlling privileged access? Do we have automated ways of managing and controlling vulnerabilities? Do we have automated ways of being able to go in and address the visibility and optics, be able to get the right information. And just some of the common pitfalls, and I won't go through all these. I always make my slides available, so I try to give you a lot of takeaways on those slides, and then during my presentation sort of just focus in on the key areas. First and foremost, we need to make sure that we're deploying solutions. A product is a product. A product must be integrated into the environment. It must be automated, and it must be tied with manual controls. Humans must still be in the loop, but you have to go in and you have to tie it with automation. Probably the other big pitfall is trying to treat all assets equally. I hear people all the time, Eric, I hear what you're saying. We have 80,000 devices in our network. There is no possible way we can secure and lock down 80,000 devices. And I agree with you. There's absolutely no way. But let me ask you a question. Are all 80,000 devices equal? If all 80,000 devices get compromised, would it be the same impact to your organization? Now let me ask you another question. I recognize and acknowledge you and your team cannot implement appropriate security for 80,000 devices. What about 80? 80. Do you think you and your team, come on, you're not shaking your head. You guys broke into your webcams. I'm watching you shake your head, right? Okay, you can't do 80. How about 60? You can't do, how about 40? Okay, 40, you're nodding your head now. Okay, so you can do 40. So great. Focusing on 40. What are the 40 most critical Linux systems, and start securing those? Put them on a separate, isolated VLAN and start implementing appropriate security. Then, once those are done, then go in and start looking at the next 40. I will tell you, with many of our clients that we've been working with for 2-3 years, if you ask me, Eric, are you doing this 100% for every asset? No. But over the last 2 to 3 years, we've done that approach where we take 40 or 50 systems, secure them, put them on an isolated VLAN, do the next. So with our clients, we might only have secured and locked down 30% of their systems, but guess what? They're the 30 most critical. They're the 30 that are often associated with the biggest incidents, and we've seen the amount of damage caused by an incident greatly reduced. So if you want a word that if you truly embrace will change your life, it's de-scoping. De-scope the problem. Don't try to go in and focus on every single device. Look at where is your critical information, tie it back to those servers, and focus in on those systems. So just real quick, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to be able to have Paul show us some of the great solutions from Beyond Trust that can go on access privileges and vulnerabilities and visibility and optics. So real quick, sort of 5 things to think about when you're securing Linux systems. Control the privileged access, focus on the remediation, prioritize risks, monitoring, and communicate with clear metrics. So if we go in and look at this, go in and limit and reduce the privileged access. Always have multi-factor authentication if you can. If you can't do multi-factor, not only strong passwords, but look for anomalies. Look for strange logins. Look for failed login attempts. Monitor the access logs. Typically, when an account gets compromised, there's a significant change in the amount of data that is accessed and the number of failed access attempts. So if you're monitoring that very closely, you can catch and find those deviations and respond very quickly. So notice something I just added in. Prevention is ideal, but detection is the must. So it's great that we always focus on prevention, but always assume whatever security you have in place can and will be compromised and bypassed, and focus in on going in and making you're fixing those highest priority areas and making sure that if a security measure fails, you can detect it in a timely manner. Remember, the reason why these companies are in the news is not because they had a breach. It's not because they failed to prevent the breach. It's because they failed to contain and control the damage. So if you're detecting and controlling the damage, that's just as effective as if you're doing timely prevention. Next, remediate, remediate, remediate. I'll be honest with you, I hate companies that have vulnerability scanning programs because I've sat on these meetings where they sit there and every other week they present all the scanning data. And they have these beautiful, pretty charts of number of vulnerabilities across different areas. And usually after 20 or 30 minutes, I'll raise my hand and I'll be like, okay, in the last 30 days, how many critical vulnerabilities did you remediate? How many critical vulnerabilities have not been remediated in the last 45 days? And I'll usually get a response like, oh, Eric, we're not there yet. We're not at that point. And I'm sitting there thinking, then what is the point? The point is you shouldn't have a vulnerability scanning program. You should have a vulnerability remediation program. Now, yes, I recognize the irony that you can't remediate if you don't scan. The point is you're changing the focus. What I want to see every month is your metrics on remediation. I want to go in and see how many critical vulnerabilities have been remediated and have stayed remediated. So think on the fixing. It's better to do a little scanning and a little remediation than a lot of scanning and no remediation. And then once again, remember security is all about risk. So one thing I want to drive in is before you go in and spend an hour of your time or $1 of your budget on anything in the name of security, I always want you to ask 3 questions. What is the risk? What is the problem we're trying to solve? 2, is it the highest priority risk? So out of everything you could possibly be doing, is this the top priority? And I tell you, that's the critical one. Because so many companies are fixing random risks to not focus on the highest priority ones. And then the third thing is your remediation measure the most cost-effective way of reducing that risk? So go in and focus on what risk, confirm it's the highest priority, and is your solution the most cost-effective way to be able to remediate and reduce that risk? And then you must be monitoring. You got to have visibility. If you don't have visibility in optics, how do you know what's going on? And this is the reason why, and it boggles my mind, that on average companies are often compromised for 2 years and have no clue. And think about that. How in the world can we have a situation where a company is very sick, information is leaving the environment, and nobody knows about it? Well, the answer is they never went to the doctor. If you don't go to the doctor and you don't get blood work and you don't go in and have visibility into what's going on with your body, you could be sick and not realize it. And that's what's happening with companies. They are not going in and getting that visibility. They are not looking in the right area. So go back to that exercise of what are those critical incidents and focus in on what information do you need. And then finally, I don't want to sound mean, but it's a reality. Executives spend money on areas where they believe they're getting a return on investment. Companies don't spend money on things that they think are wasted. So if you're asking for budget, if you're asking for resources and you're not getting it and other departments are, it's a simple reason. You have not shown them that you are offering a good return. They do not see the value in security. And I know that's a little harsh, but it's the reality. But the trick is you can change it. Start producing metrics. When was the last time you talked to your executives about security? When was the last time you've gone in and showed them metrics that track the improvement? Show them metrics on the number of attacks you're stopping every month. Show them metrics on the number of malicious code you've quarantined. Show them how you have improved your security and what the dangers are. And the more you communicate with the executives, the more support you'll get and the more resources you'll have to be able to do your security. So now that I've gone in and sort of looked at some of the key areas of focus, controlling your access, focusing in on remediation, having those clear optics of what you need to do, focus in on risk, fixing the high priority items, those are all really good strategies. Those are really good approaches. The question is, how do you actually implement that within your environment? How do you actually make that a reality? So what I like to do now is turn it over to a good friend of mine at Beyond Trust, Paul, who's going to show you how to actually go in and start implementing these solutions.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much, Eric. It's a lot of great information. And for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm a product manager here at Beyond Trust, and I focus exclusively in the privileged account management space, but specifically on Unix and Linux platforms. So, like Eric said, I'm going to spend a few minutes just dealing with that very narrow focus. Now, again, I'm assuming most of the people on the call are familiar with Beyond Trust and kind of what we do as a company, but if not, we actually do cover I guess all of the areas that Eric was talking about. Again, today I'm going to focus specifically here in that privileged management or privileged account management space, and again looking specifically at Unix and Linux. But we can deal with that, how you deal with shared accounts or shared account password management, privileged sessions, dealing with reducing the number of accounts, auditing what people are doing, vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management, all of that stuff. And again, this isn't supposed to be a sales pitch on Beyond Trust. Just be aware, as a company, we really, our goal is to help solve those problems that Eric was talking about. So again, digging into PowerBroker for Unix and Linux, that's a solution that really helps solve some of those key issues. So I would say specifically this is all about privilege control and auditing / visibility, however you want to call it. Eric refers to optics and visibility a lot, so I kind of view that more as auditing. But we're going to take a very high level look at how a particular tool can help you with solving some of those issues or easing the pain. So effectively, the main focus of our PowerBroker solutions, and specifically the one for Unix and Linux, is to eliminate that account sharing, credential sharing. And I'm not just going to show you slides, I'm actually going to show you what that looks like in the real world as well. We won't spend too long doing it because watching a Unix command line clicking around isn't the most entertaining thing to do, but we will take a brief look at that, how we can actually eliminate the sharing of credentials and reducing the overall privileges that people have. So sometimes we talk about least privilege. I've heard the term a lot, just enough privilege. I kind of like the just enough privilege more than anything, because you don't want to give somebody too many privileges to do their job, but you also don't want to give them too little, because that makes them unproductive as an employee. In fact, one of the best compliments I get about this particular solution from my customers is the fact that they can install PowerBroker for Unix and Linux, and it enables them to provide all the controls they need, audit the activities that are happening in their environment, but it doesn't get in the way. It's like, for the most part, it's there, but it doesn't stop people doing their job, which I think is the key for a least privileged tool. I've actually heard it referenced a little bit to like the Goldilocks of privilege management, as in not too much, not too little. You want it to be just right. So that's what we strive to do with PowerBroker. So again, we don't need to dig into the architecture. Really, the main thing here is the way in which you can most securely implement privilege controls is by getting your privileges in a centralized place, much easier to manage. So policy, audit information, event log, all of that visibility, all of the controls put in one central place. And with PowerBroker, that's exactly how we do it. There's a client component that goes on to your Unix or Linux hosts, and they actually communicate with that that central server in order to reference, who can do what, when they can do it, and audit that information. So one of the things that's really important when we're talking about least privilege, particularly on the Unix and Linux space, is a lot of times you focus on what people are typing on the command line, which is, for some part, if you want to talk about controls and visibility, that will definitely make your system better. So sudo is a good example of that. A user types something, and you can look at what they typed and put some controls around that. However, one of the things that we strive forward with PowerBroker for Unix and Linux is not just looking at what the user types, but really the system activities. So, like I say, not just at the command level, but what the system's actually doing. So, for example, when somebody runs a script, you need to know what controls or what commands or what that script is actually doing. So, being able to audit that and control what's actually going on inside of those scripts. It's not just what they type. If you have a symlink or a renamed executable or some sort of tampered executable, you need to make sure that you can control that as well. So control, like I say, it's much more than just looking at what the user's typing. You need to make sure you've got those sort of things in place. And again, tracking what those users are doing as well in an easy to read fashion is also really important to us as well. So, we have a whole bunch of things like we'll index, people's sessions so that you can actually go back and easily find out who's actually issuing what commands. We can generate reports, we've got dashboards, alerting, that sort of stuff. But, again, I don't want to, drag on the PowerPoints too long. Really just give you a high-level overview of, the fact that we have a number of privilege management tools, but one specifically that focus in on that Unix and Linux space. So, what I've really been talking about is three key areas tying back to the topics that Eric has covered, and that is basically stopping the account sharing. Don't do that. Obviously you need to have tight controls around your accounts in the first place, but one of the worst things you can do is share accounts so that you have no visibility into who's doing what. Controlling what the user actually can do after they've logged on, and auditing that information in a usable way. So not just again, I think Eric made reference to people that sometimes brag about the amount of audit data they can generate. It's being able to actually go in and use that information to find out what people are doing, generate the right sort of alerts, and apply future controls as well that again let people perform their job without impacting them in a negative way. So I got a very short demonstration. I should say I have a demonstration. We'll actually do one real quick. There's nothing actually pre-canned for this. I just touch on, and again, very high level, what this actually means for the Unix administrator. So this will be more obviously for the technical folks that want to see what it actually looks like from an end user perspective. So I'm just going to go in and sign into to one of my, I think this is a CentOS box. I think CentOS 6.3. Really makes no difference. Again, it's actually running the PowerBroker software on there. So as a user, just to highlight what the command control or least privilege control means, it's basically I have rights as a user that I log on with, in this case a user called Demo1, and if I need to elevate my privilege for some reason, I can actually prefix that with pbrun in the same way you would sudo, and it'll actually run that command at a higher privilege level. So this is, a very basic view for anyone that's not familiar with the idea of letting me log on as my user ID, so my real user, even though it's Demo1 in this case, and being able to perform job functions at a higher privilege level without me actually having access to the root password. Basically making root not a shared account anymore. I can just basically divide up small pieces of privilege for that root user and hand it out to the users that need it. Now obviously WhoAmI is not a real world example, it's just a nice way of actually demonstrating when you run a command that it's actually running as a different user. The nice thing with PowerBroker for Unix and Linux is all of those controls are checked centrally, and it's all actually audited centrally as well. So we're actually going to do a few things just to generate some audit activity so we can go and take a quick look at that. So dividing up individual commands is maybe more of the old school way of doing things. It's great if you've got admins with lots of time to put strict policies together, but more commonly, we see people that just want to run a privileged session, but control what the user can do inside of that privileged session. So again, another demonstration of given access to a privileged account without sharing the password. I can let this this user basically start a privileged shell. In this case, he's going to use Bash, but it could be any Unix shell. And instantly, we change the terminal colors really just to highlight now that this user is logged in with full root privileges. So he didn't need root's password. He was actually just able to start a session with privileges. And again, this is being recorded centrally with the date and timestamp, the server where he issued the command, the user that made the request, and the command that actually got elevated, in this case a Bash shell. Now just because this user's logged on and is root, most people who know anything about Unix and Linux would know that root is like the most powerful user. There's really nothing that the user root can't do. So I've done the ID command to show that I'm running as root. So who am I? Another check on the user, what basically who I'm logged on as. I actually get permission denied. And that's because when we grant these privileged shells or privileged sessions, it doesn't actually have to be a whole shell. It could just be an application that's running on the Unix system. We can control what happens, even with regards to the root user. So, for example, I'm logged on and I'm trying to run the who am I command. If we go to, just gonna go and see if we can find. Is it demo 1? I think I was logged on as. I'm gonna try it and look in root's home folder. I thought I had some symlinks I could show. Oh. Showing my lack of Unix skills. Oh, I gotta go to /root. Oh, with a space. So when I say watching Unix systems or Unix system administrators isn't the most exciting thing, it's because they're normally bashing around the keyboard, mistyping commands over and over. But just to show you another way in which that same command is blocked, and again, it doesn't matter what the user's typing. In the policy, when we choose to block who am I from being run, it doesn't matter if you run the actual explicit path to that binary or a symlink. That's actually pointing at the who am I command as well. They all get blocked. So again, for us, it doesn't actually matter how it's called. We say block this from running, and it doesn't matter. You could actually go and rename the who am I binary. You can actually see that this symlink, and we can actually look at the binary itself. Actually, we'll do that just so you can see for yourself. If you actually look at the binary, it's owned by root. Everybody has execute permissions on it. So there's really nothing the root user can do to try and manipulate those permissions. They are just completely blocked. So the last thing I'm going to show you real quick, and then we'll look at the audit logs and be done, is I mentioned that another shortcoming of a lot of least privileged tools are they can't control what's actually happening inside of a script. So, or at least audit what's happening inside of a script. So here's one where we can see some things happen, maybe a little bit more real world. They're trying to reboot a system. They put the reboot command inside a script. Normally, a least privileged tool would only log the fact that somebody's initiated the script, and you wouldn't actually see the controls, actually what's happening inside the script, or be able to apply controls to that. So obviously I cut out the script so that we can see what's going on. If I actually run the script, it starts, it finishes, but obviously the machine didn't reboot. And again, if I try and run that reboot command, that's actually going to get blocked. So there's a user that's been controlled, again, giving them the highest privilege level, but still controlling what they can do. What we'll actually do now is we'll hop back over to a central server, and I'll just show you a couple of very quick things on that session we just recorded. So here's my the date and time stamped session recording, again on a different server, centralized in this case. I can look at that audit information in a number of different ways. I can do I could look at the command history, for example, just by doing a PB replay on that file name and passing in the history switch. This will actually show me a quick breakdown of that session, the commands that the user issued. There was the who am I command being blocked. There was the ls command being allowed. So we can actually see the shell history or the session history along with what was allowed and what was blocked. But on top of that, even though I run that script, I can actually come along and actually view the audit information from that file. And again, in here, we're actually going to see the user running the script, but also, and again, I can choose what log level I want. In this case, I've actually shown to show me anything where people are running scripts where we're actually blocking activity, so people trying to run malicious scripts. All of that information, execs and reads that actually happened inside the script as it was running, being presented in a nice, easy-to-read report. And then the last thing we can do is we can actually play back the session in real time like a movie format and actually see character by character what the user typed. Unfortunately, I had a few typos in there. And again, I can search for stuff in here if I wanted to look for, I don't even know what else I ran in there. We can actually look for text. I can go a line at a time. I can go to the beginning. I can go to the end. I can see date and timestamps of where certain stuff happened. This is all indexed, so we can actually search the indexes across multiple session logs. But in any case, it gives you a lot of visibility into, in my case, what the user was on for just a couple of minutes, hammering away at the keyboard. All of that centrally logged and very referenceable from some of those reporting features. So again, this isn't supposed to be a deep dive into PowerBroker, Unix, and Linux, but just give you a feel for what it looks like when the attackers are trying to compromise a system. They're here at the command line. This is the sort of stuff where they actually make use of those vulnerabilities and apply their assaults. And I'm just saying that there are a number of very simple ways to implement controls to block people from being able to exploit those privileges, exploit those vulnerabilities, even if they do get on the system. Like Eric said, limit what those people can do. Okay, so with that said, I've got to get back to the slides and hand back over to Sarah. I think she's got a poll to wrap things up.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, guys, last poll, and then we'll jump. We had a couple of questions. I know we're approaching the top of the hour, so if you could just take a moment and answer the quick poll. We'd love to chat or take you through an even more thorough one-on-one demo of PowerBroker or even Retina if you're interested. So let us know, select yes. I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive right into questions. Paul, this came in for you. Is it possible to harden the system so as to not run any commands that are not listed in permitted list policy?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways you can do that. So we have the easiest way is we have something called a restricted shell, where effectively so often people refer to terms whitelisting and blacklisting. So for me, that is you would give somebody a restricted shell, which we ship with the PowerBroker product, and then you just whitelist commands. So you could effectively have somebody log on and allow them just to run one specific command if that's what you wanted to do. But yeah, that's very simple to achieve.
Another one for you, Paul. Would PowerBroker impose changes to our Active Directory design or structure?
So, I, in the essence of being brief, I skipped over the actual logon where I actually did perform an Active Directory authentication. What I was focusing on today was PowerBroker for Unix and Linux. It runs completely self-contained on a pure Unix, Linux, or Unix and Linux network. It actually doesn't need Active Directory in any way. We actually have a sister product that I actually look after, which is called PowerBroker Identity Services, that gets you logged on to your Unix box using your AD credentials, and it does that using pure native, actually Kerberizes the authentication and doesn't require any changes or modifications to your Active Directory at all. So you can just use your AD credentials to log on if you want to use that sister product with the least privilege tool.
Okay, time for one more question. Eric, this is for you. What balance of time should be spent between prevention and detection?
Yes, you need to do both. It's usually a skewed question because in a perfect world in which we don't live, you would actually want to have those balanced. However, I would argue most organizations, probably for the last 5, maybe even 10 years, have focused solely on prevention. So your prevention's probably in really good shape. So with most of our customers, we initially start off with about 80% detection and 20% prevention just to get caught up. And then the goal is in 3 to 5 years have them balance out. So you really have to look at what you've done in the past. And if you focused a lot of energy in one area like prevention, you might need to offset the ratio to really get detection caught up until you have that proper visibility.
Okay, guys, we have gone over our 60 minutes, so I just want to be cognizant of everybody's time and respectful of that. A reminder that you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now, and it will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so be on the lookout for that follow-up and make sure that email is whitelisted. A huge thanks to our speakers, Eric and Paul. You guys, always fun, a lot of information in 60 minutes. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here today. And to all who attended live, thank you so much for your questions and for your participation. We love having you guys, and we hope to see you at the next one. Have a wonderful rest of your day and your week. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.